You are now listening to the Film Situation podcast.
Well, I'm so happy to have Nick Gomez, who's in the house tonight. He's a filmmaker, a prolific TV director, and the guy that gave us feature films such as Laws of Gravity, New Jersey Drive, Ill Town, as well as director of many TV shows such as Homicide, Life on the Streets, The Sopranos, Oz, Dexter, Ray Donovan, Daredevil, Chicago PD, and the list goes on and on. Nick, I want to give you a very warm welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much. So nice to meet you.
Likewise. So I guess before you made the film Laws of Gravity in '92, what was your trajectory of getting into film, and how old were you when you wanted to be a filmmaker? Like, did you know from a very young age?
My life story is very weird. Started in New York, then ended up in the Boston area. Left school at an early age, migrated over to London for a while. I was there because I was really into the music. I was really young. I left home when I was 16.
First of all, what kind of music?
I was into like the whole punk rock explosion.
Oh, no way.
I was reading New Musical Express and like listening to music and WBCN in Boston, which was a very early, very progressive radio station. And I was also really into really experimental music. I was really into the avant-garde, and I just was like really driven by all of that. And
that makes sense, because I saw in your movie Ill Town, there's a kid. The kid was wearing the Mission of Burma.
Right, well, that's an old boss. That's an old boss.
Yeah. I was into punk and hardcore like in like the '90s in New York, and like super into that, and like going to CBGBs and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I was really into sort of like trying to sort of like play, so I picked up the saxophone, I picked up the keyboards, and I tried to play in bands, and I bounced around Europe. I spent some time in Spain, spent some time in London. They eventually sort of kicked me out. And then I kind of came back when I was like 17 or 18, worked in restaurants. And before that, before I left to go to Europe, I worked in these mob-run restaurants as like cooks and pot washers. So I saw lots of criminal activity all the time.
Yeah.
Corrupt cops and, bales of weed being brought in. And, I worked for a restaurant that was burned out like they did in Goodfellas, where they burned it down so they could sort of collect the money. So I had a very mixed kind of like, I never really found a class that I belonged to. I was always kind of bouncing around between sort of like a kid who was interested in weird music, but also had friends that were in the mob. I just didn't really sort of like know where I could ever really sort of fit in. And then I decided to get myself an education, and I went to SUNY Purchase, which is in Purchase near Harrison.
Yeah, great school.
And there, I was a performance art major. And what I was primarily doing most of the time there was kind of hustling and promoting and bringing bands to the school and throwing parties.
I actually went to a show years after you were in school, but I actually went to a show at SUNY Purchase.
That's funny.
Like sort of a hardcore band that was playing there.
I kind of started that whole thing because I had like a little group that did that, an organization that I formed.
That's amazing.
I didn't quite know what my direction was going to be, but then the bands that I was playing in, we needed to make a music video. So I signed up for a film course. And in doing that, I kind of caught the bug, as it were. Because one of the things that I learned a couple things about myself. I wasn't a great musician. And I didn't have the patience to sort of hang around endlessly waiting for the drummer to show up, or waiting for the bass player to fix his string, or for everybody just to get motivated to start practice. But the kids who are in the film department were hustling and doing stuff. And one day one guy was shooting something, another day somebody else was recording sound, or they were acting, or they're running around scouting locations. There was just a lot going on. I don't know if you're familiar with Hal Hartley.
And the indie New York filmmaker.
Yeah, well, he was there a couple of years before us. So
he worked with Edie Falco as well, right?
That's right. I cut his second movie because I started out as like his assistant, and also at SUNY Purchase, I was like cutting other people's movies. I was kind of into post-production.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I was into sound design. I was into that whole sort of like that kind of element of things.
Were you cutting on like a Steenbeck and that sort of thing? Yeah.
Because I was less interested in sort of like the narrative of it. I also didn't have because of my interest in the experimental. It was more about the plastic. It was more about the making of things, of sounds and putting sounds together or images together and how they work psychologically, as opposed to, someone has a love story or someone commits a crime or none of that really interested me until I took a course by a really great teacher guy named Tom Gunning in Hitchcock, where I found that there could be real ideas behind the movies. That, remember, this is like the 80s.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of big movies being made that didn't have any ideas. And then when I explored sort of Hitchcock, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You can actually, every shot can have meaning. You can do things that have real intent, and you can explore things, and you can also explore the relationships and the performances that have subtext. And that's what I kind of like learned in that scenario. So then I started working for Hal. And I was his assistant. And then on his first movie, I was like the sound recordist and then the assistant editor. And then on his second movie, I was his editor. And what I learned from him specifically is what you have to do is you have to write. Because he would get up in the morning, 6 in the morning, and write. So I sort of followed that example, and I started writing a lot of stuff. I made a short that a couple of people thought was okay. I wrote a script about some of my experiences that I saw happening in Boston when I was a kid that people seemed to like. And then I found a guy named Larry Meister, who's a wannabe producer, who said, I can raise money for a movie if you can make a movie for 35 grand.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's when I put together Laws of Gravity using where I lived in Williamsburg and the bars that I knew that I could get and the streets that I knew that I could get and my own loft and the shooting gallery's loft and the actors that I knew, because Edie Falco I knew from Studi Purchase, Saul Stein, Paul Schulze, Adam Tracy I didn't know, but I auditioned him, and we were just like a tight little family formed around this young company called the Shooting Gallery, which was a big sort of indie company that started out in the early 90s in New York City that ended up sort of blowing up and falling apart. But that's sort of where we got to start. And my movie was their first movie.
That's incredible. Actually, this is going to sound funny, but when I was first thinking about getting into film, like in the sort of before I was ever any sort of a filmmaker, and I just was like, oh, I want to sort of learn about that. I took a course at a workshop at the Learning Annex, and it was taught by that guy, Larry Meister.
He taught it? That's funny.
He did a course there.
There's a movie that you should see on YouTube called Misfire, the story of the Shooting Gallery.
Oh, I want to see
another shooting gallery filmmaker named Whitney Rancic. It tells the complete story of the rise and fall of the Shooting Gallery and Larry Meister, and it goes into great detail.
Okay, I'll definitely check that out. That's on my list for sure.
Because in some ways, Laws of Gravity, because me and my buddies like Bob Goss and our filmmaking friends were very naive, a very small little group who were sort of, working as PAs and all that kind of thing. And when Larry Meister was introduced to us with the sort of like the toxicity of the money, I imagine that would disrupt the little sort of like dysfunctional family that we had. And that was what the metaphor of Laws of Gravity was, with the handguns being the money that come into the scene and blow everything up.
Yeah.
Because I was very suspicious of this guy who seemed to be talking out of two sides of his mouth and say, listen, we're going to make a lot of movies. We're going to make a lot of money. We're going to be big stars. And I felt like it was getting away from the sort of like independent credo that we had built for ourselves. And the sort of like the fact that we had to sort of maybe just suffer a little bit longer somehow, but to before we reached the sort of goals that we had. And he was kind of offering us this magic carpet, which I was very suspicious of.
Interesting. That makes sense. I do recall when I took that course, he was somebody that definitely did not sugarcoat anything about getting into the film industry and filmmaking.
Well, he had a company for a while. I mean, we're wildly digressing, where he taught these sort of seminars, and if you came to him with a movie idea, you would pay him to develop it, and you would sell the rights.
Yeah.
In other words, you would pay him, I don't know, a couple of grand, and he would own it.
There's definitely companies that are still doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of all
crazy
kinds of things. But Laws of Gravity, incredible film. I actually first heard about the film from the Talking Sopranos podcast, and Michael Imperioli was mentioning the film because
I didn't know that.
There's a podcast called Talking Sopranos where they go.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it was pretty cool, and it was I think it was like in the middle of the pandemic that they did the podcast, and myself, like a lot of other people, were like revisiting the show during the pandemic. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen The Sopranos, and since it was out, let me rewatch the show.
Sure.
And then I was listening to the podcast, and the episode that you directed, I think it was episode 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And they actually covered the episode in the show, and Michael Imperioli was like, yeah, there's a guy named Nick Gomez that made this pretty cool movie, The Laws of Gravity. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so that's how I first heard of the film.
Yeah, it's interesting because James Gandolfini came in and was very close to playing the lead in Laws of Gravity.
That's incredible.
Because he came in and was like, oh my God, this guy's an incredible actor. But then when Peter Green came through the door, he just had something that was broken enough, right? That had a kind of he had a kind of a artistic magic that was broken and also beautiful and elegant at the same time. And Gandolfini's sort of presence was a little bit more elevated than that.
Yeah,
he had a little bit more grace, and he didn't have quite the sort of like the internalized pain that Peter Green had. So, but yeah,
Peter Green.
I stayed friends with Gandolfini after that.
Yeah, rest in peace to Peter Green, who passed away this past year.
Yeah.
So yeah, my first impression of the film was it kind of reminded me of like this Maisels Brothers style verite documentary, almost about a group of criminals. And has anybody ever asked you about the title of the film, by the way?
No. And it's so interesting because I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. Honestly,
I'll tell you my impression of the title of the film.
I mean, because the thing is, I knew that like ultimately what I was making was basically kind of a smutty little thriller, right? And it was really, a couple of steps away from a low budget paperback story, right? I was also very, The Friends of Eddie Coyle, the book itself.
Oh yeah,
very
great movie by the way, the '70s film.
Great movie, but not as great as the book. Not as great. George V. Higgins' writing.
I'm gonna write the book down. I'm gonna check that out.
Oh, George V. Higgins. There's actually a great audiobook on that too. So I just wanted, because I had kind of pretentious, experimental blood still in my veins, I wanted to do something that felt a little bit more elevated than like, gun to the head or, backroom danger
exactly.
or, whatever. So that's why. And also because of the very obvious sort of rise and fall of the characters and how everything kind of ultimately finds its own gravitational pull into a negative space.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I guess I interpreted more of your sort of friends, your friends group becomes a sort of gravitational pull. It's like, that stuff that like people's parents tell, like my parents always used to tell me like, you are who your friends are. And I used to challenge that so much when I was like a teenager, and then only to realize, yeah, that is actually 100% true.
I think that's a really smart interpretation. And I've never actually thought about that because kind of like all my movies, they're all about sort of dysfunctional groups that kind of replace the family. Because in some ways, because I'm an only child, so in some ways, I've always tried to sort of like form these familial environments.
Yeah.
But like any family, there's going to be great dysfunction, and things are going to fall apart, and there's going to be disunity. So that's a really great interpretation because I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Another realization I had when watching the film is like, like I knew how good Edie Falco was from like The Sopranos and stuff like that. There's never a split second in your movie where she's phoning it in. Like every reaction shot of her just like holding a cigarette or something and just looking at something, I feel like she's crushing it. So
I saw Edie in a off Broadway play that she had put on, actually at the Shooting Gallery, and I fell in love with her at that very moment, and then I wrote that part for her. And the two women in that film are really the heart and soul of that movie. And we had a long rehearsal period because going back to the sort of documentary idea, right? That was my gimmick. My gimmick was simply, if you turn this on in the middle of the night on HBO or Cinemax or whatever, you'd think you're watching a documentary. That's kind of all I had to go with. And that was just kind of like, that is the guiding force that I used to sort of create the whole movie, where the whole movie was supposed to be a ride along. I never wanted the camera to get somewhere before the actors. We always had to be sort of catching up with them. We were always just a little bit behind them. And we had a long rehearsal period where we had a script. We would be on book. They would improvise. I would tape record the improvisations. I would then sort of bring their improvisations back into their text. So by the time we were shooting, it was a very quick shoot. It was 12 days. They were completely on character and in character the whole time. They never, even when because we're shooting so quickly, nobody's going back to a trailer. Everybody's just sitting on a milk crate over here waiting for their scene to come back in. So they don't have time to sort of like go off and be somebody else. And those really strong relationships that were formed between Peter Green and Edie Falco, and also really sort of tense relationship between Adam Tracy and Peter Green, because they had very different sort of lifestyle choices. So they were very much at odds with each other, to the point where they actually broke down on day 2 of shooting into a fist fight.
That is wild, man.
And it sort of seemed like the whole thing might have fallen apart right then and there. And that tension between them maintained itself the whole time. And when it was time for them to sort of like be at odds with each other, that shit was real.
Yeah.
There was no holding that back. So in some ways, that we were graced with we had a long rehearsal period. We had a fantastic cast. We had people that all kind of knew each other, because they're all from the same school, and they all sort of either loved or hated each other in a very intense and connected way, and they believed in the material, and they knew that this was going to be a fun thing for them all to do. And they also knew these characters. All of them knew people like this, right? They all came from the kinds of backgrounds where it's like, yeah, I had friends that were like this, or I grew up with somebody like this. So they all had some kind of a connection. It wasn't like these were characters that were from Mars to them. They had a real sort of like connection to them.
That's incredible that you were able to still carry on the production, because I'm positive that there would be so many productions that'd be like, that's it. Like, they're not going to be working together or that sort of thing.
It teetered there for a moment. There was like, just like it was that scene where everybody's out and at the sort of having a barbecue / party in the park. It was during that.
Oh, that was like the second day shoot.
Yeah. So fortunately, we were outside, and we sort of had so we sort of had to take a break for like an hour. But it's like a little bit like kids on the, it's like, come on, guys, just make up, shake hands, give each other a hug it out. Like kids in a playground, we were able to keep going.
Yeah. So I guess they weren't hanging out at the rap party.
We didn't have a rap party. There was no money for a rap party.
Yeah.
Because so the movie was $35,000. Everybody worked for free. We sold the film to Island Pictures. Chris Blackwell, who's the guy that sort of like introduced the world
from Island Pictures.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Bob
Marley to the world, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For $500,000.
Wow.
So
incredible. That's incredible, dude.
Everybody got paid. And this is before the big, huge amounts of money being spent, at Sundance. But for us, it was a nice little paycheck. And it was nice to have all the crew, everybody, made their fee, basically.
Yeah. This is a total aside, but have you ever seen, I'm sure you've seen it, the Jamaican movie, The Harder They Come?
When I was a kid, many times, yeah. Because we as kids would sneak into, there was a Harvard Square movie theater called the Harvard Square Cinema, and you could climb up the fire escape and crawl in the window through the women's bathroom. So this is the way we were like 12, 13, 14, and we would go because they were a lot of European and R-rated movies, and maybe we'd get a chance to see some nudity or whatever. And that's where I first saw Mean Streets. Amazing. That's where I saw The Harder They Come. That's where I saw, I think, 8.5. Like, we didn't know what was going on. We were coming in the middle of the movie, but we just, so somehow that washed over me, and I internalized that stuff, even if I was there for more sort of salacious reasons at the time.
That's theater hopping on another level, Nick.
That's awesome, I'm surprised. We did it for years.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you going to do on a Saturday afternoon? Well, let's go to the movies. Even if we didn't have any money, we would just go, and no one ever caught us.
Yeah. It's pretty cool about the Island Records sort of sale. That's that's a home run for a movie that's made for $35,000.
It wasn't bad, yeah. And it gave because all the interesting thing about Laws of Gravity is that Laws of Gravity was supposed to be a movie that showed that we could make a movie. Me and my
Right,
buddy.
right.
It wasn't like this is a piece of cinema that's got real value outside of the fact that we're like, it was like a student film basically, right? Here, we had no sort of like belief or understanding that it could have any kind of real cinema, any kind of like theatrical release or anything like that. We felt it was just too small, and too grainy and 16 millimeter, and who are these people, and all that kind of thing. We didn't really think that it was or at least I didn't think. I thought it was just a way for me to sort of like finally sort of like find some way to have a kind of a career. And in fact, it was like, my notion was, well, if I make this movie good enough, then I can probably, score some gigs on TV shows, because desperate poverty was a big part of what was going on with us. I mean, we would literally go to other people's like big movies that were shooting in town and raid their craft service table for food. And we would steal film stock so that we could make our own. We were just like, we were really, really poor. And we didn't have the parents that were giving us money to make movies or to go to NYU or anything like that. We were just broke kids who were just desperate to try to do
just
something.
making it happen.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. Had you screened it at festivals and stuff like that at that time?
Oh, well, the first place that we screened it was for Fox Television, so that we could get a couple of gigs directing America's Most Wanted reenactments. If you remember that show, they did reenact like these 10-minute reenactments of horrible crimes.
Yeah.
So we did 3 or 4 of those where they give you, they just send you off with a 10-page script to like Louisiana, and you're replicating some sort of like serial killer, and you cast down there. And that was the first thing I did. And then I showed it, did a screening it's actually the first time that we actually saw it on the big screen for new directors, new films at the Museum of Modern Art.
Oh, wow.
And, the lights came up at the end of the movie, and we looked at each other like, hey, it's a movie. It plays, it makes sense from beginning to end, and everything, it all kind of works, and the music was kind of cool. And then they invited us to the festival, and it's now part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It's not bad.
Amazing. So you mentioned Mean Streets. I'm a huge Mean Streets fanatic. I love that movie. People always talk about Goodfellas or Taxi Driver when they talk about Scorsese or Raging Bull, but for me, Mean Streets is one of my favorite Scorsese films for sure.
Well, like I said, I saw Mean Streets as a little kid in the movie theater. I'm like, well, I know those guys. These are the guys in the restaurant that I have to go to at 3:00 in the afternoon. I knew all those knuckleheads, and the sort of like the low level sort of quality of their demeanor and what they were doing, and it just felt very real to me. And also just kind of what there was a spiritual drive to those characters, which I thought was kind of which I kind of somehow absorbed at the time, not understanding it.
Yes,
there was something about the spirituality of
that comes in. Actually, that plays. Yeah,
that sort of came from, because I don't have any kind of a religious background, but there was something that came in from an unseen portion of the imagination that I've not experienced before in watching sort of genre films. Right. There was something about the idea of like commingling that with a kind of a spirituality, which provided a kind of a richness. And, and honestly, like the joke was that when we screened the first time we screened the film at the Museum of Modern Art, there was a delay in getting the print to the production booth on time. And I made a joke that sorry for the delay, everybody. They accidentally laced up Mean Streets by accident. We had to change it out because Mean Streets, in terms of like the sort of like the kind of story and the Johnny boy and the level-headed sort of like more paternal character and the hot-headed younger character, that's a Mean Streets mimeograph. And I knew that when I was making the movie. I wasn't shy about that.
You were doing homage to it in a sense by naming Johnny.
I was doing homage to it because I didn't think that Laws of Gravity was a real movie.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, I'm a little embarrassed now that I didn't do a better job kind of like maybe camouflaging that because I didn't think anybody would see this thing.
Well, I think for some reason in movies, it's considered completely okay. I think it's because it's an art form that is always sort of evolving from like a previous iteration of what existed before it. So
Yeah.
that's why I think, and Scorsese is not shy about his homages either, you know?
No, homages are great. I mean, if you think about music and you think about like, just a basic blues pattern, I mean, these have been around for 100 years and we're still using them. So it's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But it was very, I mean, when I was prepping Laws of Gravity, I was watching Mean Streets probably a little bit too much. And I think I probably could have moved away from it a little
There's
bit
no
more.
such thing as too much, Nick.
It's a really great.
It can only do you right.
Yeah, it's a really great movie. And and also, just the use of the music. I mean, the thing that was interesting about Laws of Gravity is that we got all of our music almost for free, all that hip hop and stuff. Because we approached a hip hop, small independent New York hip hop label called Profile Records.
They also, I think, used to put out hardcore bands and stuff like that.
Well, second to none. Maybe hardcore bands. Maybe they migrated into that.
I could be wrong, unless
they could have migrated because they started out with hip hop.
Yeah.
But they were like, listen, we're not in the soundtrack business. You can just use it. So we had some really great artists that we were able to use, and we were able to use that as the sort of like a great tapestry of the because the idea of these characters, I wanted to surround them with like salsa and Latin music and hip hop because I felt like these guys were dinosaurs. And that the sounds that were coming out of the city around them represented the truth of what was happening in America. Is that these little guys in their little white neighborhoods were getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And what was happening is that the sort of the dynamic culture of hip hop and Latin jazz and all of that was really sort of like overcoming what their older ideas that they had about who they were and what was right for them and what their values were. And I think that they resented that to a certain extent. In a lot of ways, they were the early Trumpers, right? These guys.
I think you're mentioning something that is key that I think about a lot is that there's a lot of times things that are subconscious in cinema, right? Like you're not saying, hey, I'm putting this song in because this is exactly what's going on and I'm banging the audience over the head with that. But it's layered in there and the audience then sort of subconsciously feels that because the characters are feeling that.
Well, I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
Right. That you try to find a way to make music that feels that it's working closely with the subjective reality of the characters or the overall sort of like contextual environment of what the scene is about. And sometimes you can get heavy-handed with it. It's a subtle balance. Right. And sometimes you're restricted by what you have, right? It's just like, I can't shoot in this location because it's too expensive, so I have to go over here and shoot in this location. So it's a matter of sort of like making use of what you have, especially, when you don't have any money and you're given a bunch of free music, I mean, I think that the association between hip hop and street violence can sometimes be oversold. And I think that if I had more options, like for my second movie, for Laws of Gravity, I wanted to do a Philip Glass score. Right. I didn't want to have hip hop. Yeah. I wanted to make the movie more beautiful. Yeah. But that was an argument between Spike Lee and myself.
Almost so like an Errol Morris documentary, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of great composers out there. Michael Diamond. So I was always interested in trying to find ways where the music is sort of a contrast to what's going on, or perhaps maybe even sort of like taking you in some ways in a different direction than what's happening emotionally.
100%.
Which can be tricky because then sometimes that can just be confusing.
Well, I think it paired nicely. And by the way, I just fact checked myself before. So Profile Records did release a number of hardcore bands.
Oh, great.
Like Murphy's Law and the Cro-Mags, which are both bands that I've seen a bunch of times.
What years was that?
That was, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. So The Age of Quarrel, I think that's by the Cro-Mags that came out, I think, like.
Oh, the Cro-Mags. So well, I was really only interested in hip hop in those days, so that's probably why I didn't. Those guys.
Plus, you were already getting into the film thing full throttle. So. Yeah,
well, it's interesting because like my kid listens to a lot of early 90s rock now, like Dinosaur Jr. and a lot of stuff that like I never listened to because I was listening to Pete Rock.
Yeah.
And CL Smooth.
Yeah.
And so she's giving me a whole education now of a bunch of music really fantastic music, actually, very influential from the early '90s that I wasn't listening to at the time.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was hanging out with a filmmaking buddy of mine, this guy Roland from Staten Island, and he was there with his son. He's a bit older, and his son is kind of like 19 years old. And I was shocked how much that his son knew about like 90s hardcore music of like bands that I used to go see. Like he knew intricate details of stuff. I'm like, do you know these guys? I'm like, I knew those guys personally. I'm like, he's like, no. I'm like, how do you know all this stuff? I was so impressed.
Well, it's the internet. Those kids they're just online all the time and they're just absorbing all this information. I mean, my kid, like is really into Pavement.
Yeah, I like Pavement. I was a fan of Pavement as well.
Yeah, and they know a lot about Pavement, and they know a lot about like all these bands and where they formed and how long they stayed together and who influenced who and all that kind of stuff. And they really gave me sort of like a master class in Dinosaur Jr. who
Jay
was,
Mascis and stuff.
Yeah, who everybody like was influenced by.
Yeah.
So
it was such an interesting era, right? There was so much stuff going on, like, not that there's not stuff going on now, but it's just, I don't know, the world is just so radically different. And I guess because of technology is a big reason why it's different, but also the gentrification of things, like, which is in your film, it showed like a pre-gentrified Williamsburg, which I remember it like that. And I remember when it was kind of like changing a little bit, like, and then it happened like sort of fast and furious by like the mid 2000s kind of.
Have you seen it recently? Have you been there like in the last 5 years?
Yeah, it's like it's like Disneyland or something. It's like totally different. It's unrecognizable.
Completely.
Yeah, I remember like when I first went there, kind of like in the late 90s. Like I had a buddy that lived there. My friend Mac lived there in the year 2000. I remember going to like a just New Year's party in like 2000. Like there would be like a couple of things. Like there's like, oh, there's this one bar that plays punk rock music. Or there was like a couple of places, but a lot of it looked pretty industrial and sort of like rough looking. And then I remember like there was like a rapid change at some point. It was like crazy.
Money.
Development,
because they were all, but all those all those like small industrial warehouses and stuff like that. Like it's like you come in and you tear that down, and you put up a gigantic 15-story condo. That's where the money is.
Yeah. Was New Jersey Drive your second feature film?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that, by the way. So.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. I thought it was incredible, and I must have told half a dozen people that I know to watch it already. I'm like, have you seen this? They're like, no. I'm like, I can't believe I've never seen this before.
Yeah, it was a troubled project because I knew a lot of kids when I was a young teenager who stole cars and went on joyrides and all of that. And at the time in Newark, there was this kind of phenomenon.
Yeah.
But the phenomenon was with children, right? Kids who were like 12, 13, 14 years old, making bad decisions. And I was interested in a Brazilian movie called Peixote, which was about children in the barrios of Brazil. And I wanted New Jersey Drive to be that, where there's zero adult role actors at all. You're just spending all this time with a bunch of kids running around, acting crazy, making bad decisions, and just being kids. And I did a bunch of ride-alongs, with cops in New Jersey and all this kind of stuff. And the cops actually had a little bit of sympathy for these kids, some of them, because they knew how desperately poor they were. And for them to get behind the wheel of a car with a heater and with music and driving around, it was just like it was access to a world that they ordinarily had no idea what it was all about. And then, of course, it got dangerous and blew out of proportions. And,
so you're talking about literally like having running heat is something that like was novel to them.
Because they're living in cold water flats.
Wow.
Yeah, in like housing projects where they're just like, and I knew kids like, in the housing projects near where I live, the kids like also didn't have, you'd go to their house and there was nothing. There was like, you'd see a chair and a baby cradle and that, nothing in the refrigerator. It was just like nuts. So, I had an understanding of that kind of poverty, and I was interested in these kind of kids trying to find a way out of it, even if it was just momentarily. But then Spike Lee came in to be a producer, and then Universal, my ideas didn't jibe with what their ideas about what a movie should be, and that there should be, there should be redeeming adults that they're showing some responsibility, and the choices should have certain kinds of consequences, and all the sort of like trappings of a Hollywood film, right? And then of course, sort of the reality of like the limits of working with kids who are 12 years old, which is something that I didn't like kind of realize until later. And I had spent so much time developing it, right? That a year gone by, a couple years gone by, I'm like, fuck, do I just abandon this thing and give up my principles, or just go ahead and make the movie because God, I need to make a movie?
Yeah.
And so I chose the latter. And it was a very unique experience for me because I remember the first day showing up on set, my car is driving past truck after truck after truck after truck after truck, and I get out and people are coming up to me and offering me coffees. Yes, sir. No, sir. No, 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 no. And I'm like, I was used to a guy who was just like working with a crew of a half a dozen people.
Right.
And
I see what you
know
mean.
everybody.
Yeah.
And it's I'm suddenly like, who is this and who is this? I didn't know
Oh, so
anyone.
was this before you were directing television and stuff like that?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
definitely. So I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any of that small stuff any of those ideas, and it was a and I had a DP that I thought was very slow, and it was just a grind for me. Unfortunately, I had a great cast.
Looking
And-
back on it, was he objectively slow, or is it just different working in that kind of situation versus working with like your DP that was documentary
Objectively
stuff?
slow. I worked with a lot of DPs. This guy was slow.
Okay. That's rough because it's like then it's a new working situation and he's slow,
Yeah. And didn't like the idea of working handheld at all.
Oh,
which
man.
was sort of like my forte.
Yeah.
So he purposely sort of like got these big Panavision Gold cameras, which are like the size of a Volkswagen. So you can't really shoot handheld with them. So there's just a lot of strife, and it was really that young cast that was able to sort of like, who were fantastic, that were able for me to make things interesting and sort of transcend the limitations of it. And I'm overstating the negatives because there was also, it gave me a chance to sort of like have bigger scope, have bigger ideas, work with some bigger set pieces, do a French Connection-esque car chase.
Oh yeah. I love the French
things
Connection.
like that. Yeah, so there was things, and and you learn a lot. It was a positive and negative working with studios, and sort of like making up my mind after that not to work with studios again and to keep my sort of vision strong. And also for me, like a 30-day shoot felt really long. I'm like a punk rocker. I like short, fast songs.
Yeah.
For me to sort of like develop something for 2 years and then to shoot it and then cut it and notes back and forth and test screenings, I'm like, dude, I could have made 3 fucking movies in this amount of time, if I kept to my indie guns. So that my next movie, Illtown, was the same kind of deal. $1 million, shot down in Florida, small bunch of people, a lot of the same people that I've worked with, cast-wise, that I've worked with before, and very, very experimental in its structure, not a commercial movie at all, very sort of surreal and slow and like a kind of like a heroin-induced idea of a crime film.
Well, we're gonna get to that one in a moment, and I really like that one a lot as well. But one thing I want to say about New Jersey Drive is I thought the performances that you got out of your actors were incredible. Like, I guess the lead was played by Sharon
Corley.
Yeah, he was great, man.
Kid, zero experience.
Yeah, he was
And
great.
one thing that I learned doing like America's Most Wanted's in the middle of nowhere and casting out of high schools, and gymnasiums and stuff, local people, is how much talent is out there of the people that can really sort of like come up with great performances. And I also learned how to talk to people about acting who didn't necessarily have any kind of training, and how to keep the simplistic way of like managing, sort of like talking about who they are in this moment emotionally, or where they're just coming contextually, and using that as a way to give them some guidance, as opposed to saying, well, could you try it a little bit more like this or a little bit more like that? More like simple things like, dude, it took you it took you an hour and a half to get here because you were stuck in traffic, and that's your motivation. The simplest way to sort of like talk to actors about that stuff when they're not trained. And I thought, and that's still that, and that's.
I think even if they are trained, it sounds like really good direction, honestly.
Something that I've held on to, and I find that the least number of words that I give to an actor, the more successful I am.
That makes sense. Yeah.
If I can give them a note in one word, then I've done, and it works, then I've done my job.
One thing I'm curious to always ask from directors is sometimes there's a moment that's like so profound, like I mentioned Laws of Gravity before, where Edie Falco is just like sitting there with a cigarette, are you giving them any sort of direction? Like, she's so good, do you even have to give her any sort of direction, or are you kind of drawing out those kind of like those moments where it's nonverbal, and like, and what are you doing? Like,
Again, because the rehearsal was so in depth, right? And that they as an ensemble had grown so close that the direction was more about sort of guiding them a little bit during the rehearsals and just reminding them that I just wanted to sort of keep it live and lively and overlapping and spontaneous feeling, and for you to sort of like have the freedom to keep those moments alive and not worry about stepping on somebody else's. You know, there's a lot of formality in acting, especially for film and television, where no overlaps. You want to give the people there's a kind of a level of performance which can sometimes be limiting, and I wanted to shake all that up and move them away from any of that, so they felt that they could just sort of do what they felt like they needed to do in the moment. So
Nice.
the answer is there was no time, but when you're shooting 12, 15 pages a day, there isn't any, and this is the way that I still like to work. I'm a couple of takes guy. I do a couple of takes and I move on.
There's something I read from a philosopher, from a guy named Krishna Moretti, that said that consciousness is like a flowing stream. Like, if you were skipping rocks, if you stopped to look at each rock that you were skipping across, like if you were going across a pond, like where you were stepping, you would sort of freeze and clam up. But if you just keep going, your foot is gonna find the next rock.
That is really perfect, because early when I first started working with sort of like more heady professional types of people, and I was giving people notes, I felt like I was over articulating the information that I was trying to convey. And so I would step back, the camera would roll, we would get to the point where my note was about to be addressed, and the actor would be like so flummoxed by trying to incorporate what I had just stumbled through explaining to them, they would blow it. And because I took them out, my trying to improve them actually took them out of their own flow. And that's exactly right. You've got to find what their flow is, and then you've got to be like a little leaf on that water and just kind of go right along with it without doing anything to disrupt it.
Oh,
that's
great,
perfect.
Yeah, well said. So yeah, let's talk about Illtown. That was a movie that I really appreciated as well, actually. I felt like Illtown is kind of this non-linear crime film, for people not familiar, that follows like a small group of heroin, like this heroin operation, and where there's a betrayal. It kind of felt like a precursor to the Rian Johnson movie Brick. Have you ever seen Brick?
I love Brick.
Yeah, it was so good. But when you saw Brick, did you think like, wow, Illtown was like, there's like something like, there's something spiritually similar?
I think that Brick wore its Raymond Chandler influences on its sleeve more proudly, because for me, what Illtown literally was a way for me to sort of close the door on a certain kind of genre that I had in my blood for so long. I wanted to sort of like, I wanted to slowly bring down the curtain on the crime genre in my life. I wanted to find a way to sort of put it to bed with a nice sort of narcotic haze, and sort of like go against the sort of like expectations of what those kinds of films are supposed to be, but at the same time trying where I could to manage those expectations and to provide a certain amount of genre expectations, but also in a way that was so kind of bizarre and dreamlike that they weren't fully articulated. And the thing is like, when I'm making a movie like that, I'm making it for myself. That was a total movie for me to sort of like work a bunch of shit out for myself.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what most directors should be doing is thinking about the audience and the people that, getting asses in seats. And I didn't do that with that movie. I was really just sort of working stuff out for myself and what I wanted to do and what interested me as an artist. which is good and bad. I mean, it can work against you. It's not a movie that a lot of people have seen and a lot of people know. It was distributed independently by the shooting gallery. There was no real buyer when we went to the Toronto Film Festival. I
Gotcha.
mean, so it's
So it's
I
with
still like
Michael
the movie.
Rappaport. Oh no, go
Yeah.
ahead. You still like the movie, but
I still like the movie, and I feel like it's very specific. It's very kind of, trip hop, like Tricky or something, in those days. It has a very kind of a very defined style that may or may not live on, right? May or may not be a classic like, a Lumet movie that is timeless, right? It sort of feels very much of at least for me, it's very much of who I was at that time, and the sort of like because it was also a little bit of an answer of like my frustrations with New Jersey Drive. I wanted to do something that was completely mine, that no one was going to tell me anything about how to sort of structure it or how to put it together or give me any kind of notes. And there may be kind of an arrogance built into that, because it is a commercial medium. It is an industrial art, and it does depend on. And the movie only cost a mill, but it does depend on a commercial success in order for a director to maintain his livelihood.
yeah. So it was with Michael Rappaport, Lily Taylor, Adam Tracy, who you've worked with before, of course, Kevin Corrigan, Tony Danza is in it. I liked his performance in it. It made me wish I had seen him in more feature films, to be honest.
And not to mention Isaac Hayes.
Isaac Hayes is incredible, of course.
Right.
Legendary.
So it's a very unusual movie, and it's not, it's like jazz. It's like not for everybody, right? And Tony Danza was an actor that I've always really admired, and I kind of always liked the truth that he brought to things. And I know he's a guy that had decades in sitcoms, and maybe not like the people like Tony Danza. What the hell is he? But I wanted to give him a chance, and I thought he did a great job.
He did. How was he to work with? Was he a nice guy?
Easy.
Yeah.
The best, and a professional, and just and Isaac was fantastic. He just a sweetheart. There's a funny moment with Isaac Hayes. So we were all staying in the same hotel in Lakewood, Florida, where we also shot a lot of the material. And there's a piano in the lobby. And Isaac Hayes in the morning would go down there and play some piano. And it was at some point a couple of very sweet old ladies came up and put a couple of dollars on the keyboard. You're doing a very good job, Sonny. Very nice piano playing.
Oh, man.
He's like, thank you very much, man. Thank you very much.
That's amazing. So one thing I got to say is the kid that played the deaf kid,
Yeah,
he was so good in it.
he was great.
I actually wish there was a whole movie. I wish like you had made a whole movie based off that kid and like his interactions. That's a movie I would have watched.
That would have, he was the kind of like saving centerpiece of that movie, because he represented in a lot of ways me as a kid, as being kind of like an angry, confused, needed to get away, didn't know where he belonged, on the run, nonverbal. Because I had a couple of years of sort of like of voluntary nonverbalism where I didn't talk at all.
Interesting. How old are you? From what ages?
15, 16, 17.
That's fascinating.
For I just like only in certain circumstances would I talk because of deep insecurities. So he kind of represented, someone who had a power and a drive, but didn't know how to articulate it and didn't know how to sort of like put it forth.
Yeah, I thought he crushed it, and I loved the scenes with him and Lily Taylor and Michael Rappaport. Yeah. Michael Rappaport, I think it's his best performance on screen.
It is.
Honestly.
It is.
Yeah,
it totally is.
Yeah, and I love True Romance. By the way, I'm a huge True Romance fan.
Oh, me too.
But this is better than that. His performance.
He brought a lot to it. I mean, there was a lot of contouring him a little bit to sort of bring him down because he's a big personality.
Yeah.
I think that Lily Taylor in general sort of her high bar of performance levels.
Yes.
Sort of spread out to everybody involved.
That's very clear, by the way. I was gonna mention her next. I have a new respect for her actually after watching. I guess like I didn't know a lot of her materials. Like I've seen The Conjuring, and I'm sure I've seen a bunch of stuff that she's been in. But this movie in particular really stood out. I'm like, wow, she's incredible.
She's incredible, and she has a lot of great technique. And it's funny, we would go to film festivals with it, and people ask me, "What's it like working with Little Taylor?" Taylor, and I would say, "Well, she's a great driver because she would like drive and hit the marks and stop exactly where you needed to stop to be on camera and all that kind of thing." And I would, because I could answer that question in a million different sort of pretentious ways.
Yeah.
But I'm like, what's great about Lily is she knows how to drive, and that was really helpful to us. And I said to Lily, Lily, you know what? They're asking me these questions about you, and I'm telling them that one of the things I like working about you is that you're a great driver, and why am I reducing you to that? And she's like, because you're not pretentious.
Yeah. Had you worked with her after that, after this film?
No,
Okay.
no. But we stayed friends, and I've seen her in a lot of I've actually seen her in a lot of theater in New York, more than her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she's definitely somebody that I'm like, oh, I want to like check out more of her stuff.
Force of nature. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was pretty cool. A young Eddie K. Thomas, pre-American
Yes.
Pie.
That's right.
He blew up.
He was just a child, a very young kid. He did a nice little job. Yeah.
And Kevin Corrigan, who's a New York actor, done a ton of stuff.
Great actor.
And yeah, man. That's a big purpose of the podcast is kind of like shining light to movies that, deserve even further attention from, newer audiences or whatever, like, people that are trying to explore cinema.
Speaking of that, I wish I could remember the name of the movie now, because David Proval, who you interviewed, he was a lead in a very small, very interesting independent feature.
Let's look it up.
Back in the 70s, which you should definitely check out, because it is such a gritty New York story that is really surprising.
Do you remember kind of like the subject matter of the film?
He plays a guy who is on the spectrum who thinks he's Superman.
Nunzio, right?
Nunzio.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Okay.
It's on YouTube. Yeah.
I'm going to watch Nunzio. Yeah. Love David Proval, who was also in The Sopranos. Of course. Right. So this is a good segue to talk about some of your TV work, which is really interesting, by the way, because you've been involved in sort of like TV in the last 20 years has really, the level of quality has become incredible, actually. So people used to kind of think of TV as kind of, it was inferior to film, but I think that perception is changed from many people now, especially the younger generation.
It was perceptual, but it was also institutional. Like
right,
in LA,
right.
In LA, TV people and movie people do not mix. They do not know each other. They do not live in the same neighborhoods. And they do not hang out together. I mean, maybe that's changed now because of with streaming. But it was a really interesting phenomenon. Is that they're just it's a whole different. It's as if it was two different worlds. And the thing about what's kind of interesting for me in TV is that after I made Laws of Gravity in the documentary style, I got a call from Barry Levinson and a guy named Tom Fontana, who said they wanted to meet with me because they're doing a TV series and they were adapting a book called Homicide by David Simon.
Who did The Wire, right?
Yeah, eventually did The Wire. So I read the book and I thought it was amazing because it really sort of like got under the skin of what real police were like. And I got together with them and they were like, we really like your movie and we kind of want our TV show to look like that. What's the deal? Like, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, basically, there's no dollies. You work with a very small, light crew, 16 millimeter. You hire Jean de Ségunzac, who is the genius DP of Laws of Gravity. He'll give you that kind of flow that you're looking for. And you just sort of keep it light, you keep it moving. And you don't load up your truck after truck after truck with a bunch of equipment that you don't end up using. Just go with a small crew and shoot it quickly and have a handheld camera and just trust the cast so that to give you what they need. And they're like, yeah, okay. So they said they took that idea and then turned that into Homicide. And then they gave me I think I did the third episode. I ended up doing 3 or 4 more after that. But it was really, that was sort of the beginning of a kind of gritty, handheld, cinema verite style of police procedurals shot down in Baltimore using real streets and real locations and all that kind of stuff. So I was lucky to be sort of part and parcel of that whole sort of phenomenon and a shift in the dynamic of what TV could be. Because Homicide had really terrible ratings, right? But it was really popular with the critics, and it got a Peabody Award, and it was inexpensive, which was the key thing. And that's why NBC could keep it around, because it didn't have a ballooning budget because of all of the size of the crew was always maintained to be very small.
Gotcha. Was it just like a circumstantial sort of thing about the ratings, like about the time slot that it was on? They didn't do enough marketing?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. It's hard.
But it ran for 7 seasons. So, I think it was a little bit, and because it kept on getting like awards and Peabody Awards and things like that, I think it was a little bit of an inexpensive, side piece for NBC to keep it going.
Yeah, I see. Barry Levinson, incredible director himself, that did so many great movies.
Diner.
Yeah, Diner. And it's funny, he recently did a movie that I had the DP on his movie, Dante Spinati. I had who DP'd the movie
Great
Heat.
DP.
Yeah, great DP. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And then there was kind of like, I guess, Michael Mann, who had also kind of crossed over from like TV, like Barry Levinson, it seemed like was involved in television production, but also feature films. Michael Mann, I know, also kind of was that sort of guy, like with like Miami.
Well, he did a short-lived series called Robbery Homicide Division, which I did an episode of.
Oh, okay.
Sort of hard to find now, which is kind of a combination of Miami Vice and Heat, all put together. Very also one of the first TV shows to shoot on video, because Michael Mann was very interested, obviously, in the new technology.
He also did the movie Collateral, that was like
that was also shot in video,
early digital film.
Yeah,
great movie, by the way. I love that movie.
Yeah.
How was it like directing The Sopranos?
The Sopranos was a tough racket, because it was very, for me, right? So here I was, I had written and directed 3 or 4 movies already, right? And I am the writer director, so I'm the boss.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then obviously I'm a collaborator, and I like to work with people, but suddenly now there's like writers and producers marching around me all the time, sort of like talking to the actors and giving me notes and telling me what to do. It was a very unusual transition for me, and perhaps a bit bumpy, because I wasn't used to that kind of working environment. I wasn't used to sort of working under the auspices, because before that I'd worked with Tom Fontana on Oz and obviously on Homicide: Life on the Street. But Tom Fontana ran his productions like an Italian kitchen, where everybody was just like yelling at each other all the time, and you could kind of do what you wanted, but it was like, you would get teased and yelled at and told how stupid you were and how that's not going to work, and you can never do that kind of shot. But you just kept on doing it anyway, because it was a lively, continual sort of conversation. It was almost like a circus.
Yeah,
it was fun like that. But then, working for HBO and for David Chase was a much more buttoned down environment, which was one that was a little bit difficult for me to get used to.
Got you. Now, how different, and I'm sure you get to ask this question quite a bit, but how different is it directing a TV show versus a movie?
Well, because there's so many different kinds of TV shows. I mean, I've done some shows with a guy named Blake Masters, who did a show called Brotherhood, which was shot in Providence, Rhode Island, which is sort of about with Jason Isaac and Jason Clarke, and they're 2 brothers, and they're sort of, one is a politician, one is a criminal, and they're sort of fighting for the soul of Providence, Rhode Island. It's a little bit of the Whitey Bulger story.
Oh, cool.
And he was a brilliant guy to work with, because he understood cinema and wanted you to be a director and wanted you to be as cinematic as possible and encouraged that. Other shows sort of just want you to see the actors say the words. So if a lip is moving and a word is being uttered, it has to be on camera. So there's a pedantic quality to that, where it's like, you got to show this face, you got to show that face. And there's also this phenomenon of using multiple cameras, right? Where he's like, you got a camera over here, getting the shot that you want. There's another B camera over here, just getting something, and there's a C camera over there. And then the editor sort of like mixes it all up and cuts it all together in the end. And it's like, okay, like I'm a one camera guy. So that can be really kind of frustrating. So the thing about working in TV is that you're working all the time. And I like the idea of like being like back in the day when you worked for Warner Brothers, where you were on the lot and you're just given assignments and you're doing job after job after job. I kind of like that because I like the ability when I can just to sort of put my fingerprint on something that I don't really have a connection with. But the job is to go in there and find the connection, to learn something about yourself as an artist, learn something about the people that are around you as artists, and coming away having learned something. Sometimes when you're doing television, you come away having not learned anything. So it's a bit of a mix. And I find that like certainly during the sort of like the 2000s, there was more stuff going on that was a little bit more interesting. And I'm finding now that the material can sometimes be a little bit on the flatter side. Right, where it's not as much exploration going on, and I think that it's because it's also like with streaming and the sort of more traditional linear companies, they don't quite know what they're doing, what their future is, how to approach their material. The industry is going through a lot of convulsions right now. Certainly since the strike, certainly since COVID, there's a lot of fear, and LA is a ghost town. LA is like Detroit after the audio industry left. It's terrible.
There's been an exodus for real. And what you're talking about, the phenomenon of kind of flash, has been talked about a lot in even recent months with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were on the Joe Rogan podcast recently and talked about how they get specific notes from Netflix saying that, oh, you have to say the plot of every couple of minutes, like, like dictate what's going on. You're like, what? Like,
Right. But Netflix is, the thing about globalism, right? Netflix isn't thinking about the guy who's watching a Ben Affleck movie in Boston, right? Yeah. They're thinking about who's watching a Ben Affleck movie in all of Europe and in Asia, and it's got to translate globally. So then you have to have a kind of like a full understanding so that every audience member can get it. And they're trying to, they're pushing their markets obviously into South America. So when you're making a piece of commercial art, an industrial piece of art that has to play for every single audience member, ideally, right? So that you get the eyes and you get the numbers, that's going to diminish it.
Yeah.
If you're making something for people who are just fans of a certain kind of mode of creativity, then you can address that mode.
100%. Right? Yeah, that makes sense. So one question I want to ask you before we segue into the part of the podcast where I ask about 2 movie ideas is, do you have any because you've worked with, I'm impressed with like how prolific you've been and like how much you've directed, and you've worked with all kinds of actors and great ones. And do you have any strategy? I'm sure there's been times where you're working with difficult actors. That's a really great question, because what happens is you show up, the producers have you have a general sort of meeting with them. At some point, some producer is going to give you what they think the sort of like the lowdown is with the cast members. So-and-so is great at this. So-and-so is great at this. So-and-so is like, a little bit of a problem. They're asking questions all the time. They're a little bit difficult. And I've gotten to the point where I actually ask them not to tell me that information anymore. Because I find myself now, all right, so they've told me this thing that this actor is difficult. I'm now walking onto the set to meet this person for the first time with that subconscious baggage. Right.
Becoming part of our dynamic.
That makes sense. And plus a good actor is going to ask questions, right?
Of course. And I always find every time they tell me there's a couple of sort of dominant male actors, right, who are of a certain age that have been around for a while, that they're always, oh my God, I wish we never cast him, blah, 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 nightmare. And I work with them and they end up like just being like fantastic and great to work with. And they have great ideas and they have great questions. They just need to be heard, right? They just need to be, because they have ideas. And so the metaphor that I always use is like you park at the bottom of the trail and you go on a little walk with them, and you go on the walk and then you come back to the parking lot and you're right back where you started, but you've had that opportunity for them to be heard. and then you can just continue from there. That's all they want to do, and they have every right to do so. It's them that's up there, so you have to respect that. And I've had very few. I mean, I've worked with a lot of guys, a lot of people. I've had very few like nightmares, right? I've had people that have nightmare reputations, but when I'm working with them, I find them just actually to be a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, that's a great advice in general. You know, I appreciate you sharing that.
You can't, because they, the thing is like, it's very hard to produce TV shows. You're working very hard, long hours, and there's a lot to do, and any added sort of layer of effort that's required to deal with something becomes, because I've got to mix over here. I've got to break a story over here. I've got to be in the writer's room over here. I've got to do this over here. It's so if an actor wants a 15-minute phone call, it's like, oh Jesus, do I have to talk to this guy again? And so that what happens is there ends up being this kind of separation between the creators and the actor, where the actor doesn't feel like anybody's listening to them. And so then the director shows up. It's like, are you going to listen to me? Oh, thank you. Finally, someone's going to fucking listen to me, and now we can have a nice chat. We can have a good time together. It's a weird,
interesting. That's so fascinating, man. It's interesting hearing this like sort of inside perspective of the whole thing. It all makes sense. Like because you've seen every level of it.
But also, the actors aren't going to do their best work.
Right. Yeah. People want to feel heard in general, and that's something I learned early on. Is I used to work for when I was younger. In my early 20s, I worked for this Sicilian ironworks company in the Bronx, and I used to be the job estimator. And it was called S&V Ironworks, Sal and Vinny Ironworks, and the owner Sal was such a character. But I remember being in his office, and somebody called, and like I could hear the woman on the phone how pissed she was. She's like, "You motherfucker," this and that, like cursing up a storm. And then like she's like, "You were supposed to be here, you didn't show up." And then like he hung up. He's like, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I forgot about the appointment. Ma'am, I'm sorry." And then like he hung up. I was like, "Sal," I was like, "Give me her number." He's like, "Well, you're not going to get anything out of her." I was like, "Give me her number." I called her up. I'm like, I understand. I was like, okay. And then I came back, like I went to go meet her, and I came back with like $3,000 in cash, like for the deposit for the thing. He's like, "How did you do that?" And all I did was acknowledge why she was pissed off. I was like, I would be pissed off too.
That's all it takes. That's all it takes. People people get, there's a certain frustration builds up over time.
Yeah.
You're tired. You're working long hours, and you're getting picked up at 4:30 in the morning, and you're sitting in a makeup trailer for an hour and all this kind of thing. And it's like, can't somebody come out and talk to me for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I don't know where that. I wonder if that might be sort of like a baked-in cultural thing, because sometimes there's these sort of like traditions that get built into sort of industrial arts where everybody approaches things a certain way because they did it this way that year, and now every year is sort of the same. And you learn from the people that you have worked for in the past.
It's a good point, man, and for sure some of it is that. Some of it is that because this is one thing I don't like about the industry is it's such a hierarchical sort of structure. And it's like, and I think like somebody like you that comes from like a punk rock sensibility is kind of like, fuck all that. Like, like just cause I'm the director, I'd imagine, and I'm like projecting here, but like just from knowing you, you don't strike me as this type of person that is going to treat somebody in any level of the departments, like, you know what I mean? Like even if they're running the honey wagon as like being like not important, Dude, let me tell you something, man. Like I have lost more relationships with important creators because I don't hide my disdain for them if they mistreat people. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of mistreatment that goes on, and there's a lot of people, and it all starts at the top, and there's a lot of people that act like assholes to everyone around them. And once I see that, like some people can just go with the flow. Oh yeah, sure, whatever you need, boss, I'll get it done. But it's like, no, fuck you, dude. Really, that's the way you're going to talk to people?
Yeah.
It's like, come on, what are we doing here?
Exactly.
We are making entertainment for people.
It's a privilege to be there, So I hear you, man. Trust me. And I even noticed it one time myself in a situation like that, how people treat people if they think like I was in my studio. I used to have a studio in the Bronx, so we did commercials and all kinds of things. And I was carrying like a box of cables or something, you know what I mean? Like some milk crate of cables when an actress came in, and she was being borderline nasty to me. Like she was coming in to like rehearse or something, like for my friend who was, using my space as like a rehearsal space. And then my friend came in because he wasn't there yet. He was like, oh, by the way, that's Zef. He's the owner of the studio. And she completely changed how she talks to me. She's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Nice to meet you. And I'm like, really? Like, you know what I mean? You thought if I was just like, a laborer here, like you were being nasty to me, and now that I'm like the owner of the place, you're being friendly with me. Like what is
I don't
that?
recognize that happening, and I didn't see that shift.
Right? Like what is that?
Yeah.
Anyways, so now we're gonna talk about. We ask each guest on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
About two of their favorite movie scenes, two movie scenes that they like, and Nick chose a scene from the Stanley Kubrick film Barry Lyndon, the 1975 movie. Great movie, by the way. Of course, I'm a Kubrick fanatic myself.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess tell us a little bit about the film and the scene and why it resonated with you.
Well, the simplicity. I went to a Stanley Kubrick museum exhibition where you could flip through some of the real screenplays that they had. And it's like a page and a half, right?
Yeah.
And it's the simplicity, and it's a scene that we've seen in because it's what's interesting about genre, right? Genre where it's and Kubrick was a genre director. I mean, he worked in genres, war films, heists, right? Period pieces. And so
horror,
here you have
like The Shining. Yeah.
Yeah, horror, exactly. So here you have someone being robbed at gunpoint, right? Could have been a street corner. This happened to be in the woods. Beautiful, pastoral, light flute music playing, maybe 6 setups for the whole thing, a simple performance, smart dialogue, and then it's over. And it changed the character's life forever. Completely changed the trajectory of the
It changed his
story.
momentum for sure, because he had stuff going on before that. Yeah.
Completely pivoted the whole thing. And it was just like and I just watched it again, and it's Alvy O'Connor, I think his name is, who played Captain Feeney.
Yeah, he was great.
His performance was just so simple and straightforward.
And he was polite about it too, which is funny because, some people might say like, oh, that's unrealistic. But then I've read up on the Black Hand. That was like the precursor to the mafia in New York. And they would send letters to people, like snail mail letters, obviously, like, in the 1900s, like there was extortion, but they said it was like the most polite thing at first. It's like, dear sir, like, we are letting you know that we will plant a bomb in your store unless you pay this ransom. But like, it's like the whole thing was like written very politely, even though they were doing this extortion.
Right, where a lesser filmmaker could have been like some crazed gunman, snarling, drooling, give me your money, throw him down on the ground, pull him off the horse, whatever else. But the two of them were traded their niceties like they were having tea together.
Right.
And it just always struck me as a film that's overwhelmingly beautiful with hundreds of great moments. One of my favorite movies, by the way. Just to take such a pivotal moment and to reduce it to the simplest terms between two great actors, well, 3 if you include Seamus, the son, to hold such an important and pivotal role in a movie, because it was so important and pivotal. You can imagine another director sort of like making more of it, making it more bombastic, making it more. He's in the mud, let's say, right, and he gets up and he has to walk away, and he's now destitute and there's nothing left, and he walks away with his boots because they spared him his boots, and it was kind of it was gracious and elegant, and that's why I thought that was kind of an interesting scene.
Yeah, it's incredible film, incredible score for that movie too. Like, it was like watching it again, it was like, man, the score is so great in this film. And Kubrick, I know, is big on music and score, and he's somebody that compared cinema. He said cinema is closest to music than it is any other art form. And I think
it's temporal.
It's temporal. Exactly.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that. It's temporal.
Yeah.
You know, it's an art form that happens over time. So, you know, so yeah. One last thing about Barry Lyndon is like watching it, it made me wonder if like the voiceover in it was kind of influential to Scorsese, like doing like Goodfellas later on. I mean, I know that's like Goodfellas is like a first person sort of narration voiceover, and this was like a third person, but like, you know what I mean? It's so like, bam, like, you know, that it just made me wonder. I'm like, I wonder if like how influential.
Well, you know, so it's interesting. So I think that both movies had voiceover journeys, because I read an early version of Barry Lyndon where Barry does the voiceover.
Interesting.
Where it's not a narrator.
Yeah.
Right. And so Kubrick had used narrators before when he did The Killing.
Yeah.
Right.
And A Clockwork Orange, I guess.
Oh, does it? Does Clockwork Orange?
But in a first person, does Alex like?
No, Alex does the voiceover.
Yeah, that's that's what I mean. Yeah.
But a narrator.
Oh, like a third party narrator. Yeah.
It's specific to sort of like crime movies.
Right.
You know,
that's true.
8:15 on Saturday night in Los Angeles. You know, it's that kind of thing. So he took that and sort of made it poetic in The Killing, and then took that even further. It's a fantastic thing about Barry Lyndon is that narration is a thing unto a piece of music unto itself, where it says, great historians could never untangle like the mysteries of the 100-Year War, but here we are, and this is where we're going to start our little simple story. It was really an elegant way to take us into it, and very literate as well,
and also funny. I think it's actually kind of hysterical,
ironic.
Yeah,
ironic counterpoint all the time. Yeah, which is great. Yeah. Yeah, Kubrick. God.
Yeah. He was the GOAT, you know?
Yeah.
I actually have a friend of mine sent me this, I heard that Kubrick, I just printed this out the other day. It's like freaking, let me unblur this for a second. Supposedly Kubrick had this in every room of his house, like this list of rules that says, if you open it, close it. If you turn it on, turn it off. If you unlock it, lock it. There's like these 12 rules. I'm like,
I love that. Hey, can you?
I'm gonna send you that.
Because my kid needs to read that.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you this. Yeah, I have to put it in more rooms in my house so my family members see it too. But anyway, so Bugonia is the second film. I just saw it actually after you mentioned it. It was on my list already. It was like definitely like I was intending to get around to it, and I'm so happy that I did. I loved it. I completely loved it. And so the film Bugonia by Yorgos Lanthimos is an off-kilter, funny, is a comedic thriller where two conspiracy brain guys kidnap a big-time pharma CEO because they're convinced she's literally an alien. And what unfolds in this sort of claustrophobic, kind of absurd standoff is just this whole sense of paranoia and power and the way people spiral when they think they've cracked the truth. And I guess the scene that Nick chose is when Emma Stone's character first wakes up after she's realized she's been kidnapped, and her head has just been shaved on the way to the house, by the way. And that was another thing that was incredible when I was watching the film. I was like, did they really shave her fucking head? I'm like, that doesn't look like VFX right there. I'm like, and then sure enough, I read up that they actually shaved her head.
Well, that's Emma Stone. I mean, she was like, sure. You always say, can you shave your head? So yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I mean, they've worked together on like a lot of movies, and my newfound respect for Emma Stone in watching that movie, just like, I mean, obviously she's won like 3 Academy Awards, obviously a great actor, but the level that she brings to that performance, and again, it's simple. It's basically a two-hander. Right? And two people sort of like with different intentions trying to sort of like manage the situation. And she's doing a great job with her corporate overspeak to try to take control of the situation. And she's also trained enough to know that the kidnapper has to feel like they're in charge. So she knows how to throw in that kind of language. So she's almost like a trained AI mechanism in hitting all the buttons along the way to sort of take control of the situation, to let Clemens know what the consequences are, but she's not creating the consequences. The consequences are happening outside right? But she just wants Clemens to realize what's happening outside of what his sphere of understanding is, that he should know. Yeah, I'm not here to confront you, and I'm not here to sort of like doubt what your point of view is. And if you think that I'm an alien, okay, I can run with that. But I just really think that you need to understand like what it is that you're doing, and her sort of like her ability to sort of like, and the character is even like, wow, you just blew me away with that. My heart is racing, because she was that good.
Yeah.
Right. And Clemens was that good. Again,
he's incredible. Yeah.
I've seen him in a lot of things, but I've never seen him quite as amazing as this.
I agree completely. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the thing is, they were working with a VistaVision camera, right? They had one backup 35 millimeter camera. But
is that why they had that sort of aspect ratio? Or
that is one aspect. It's a tall aspect ratio because they're in that basement all the time.
Yes.
So
it adds to the story. It's not just stylistic. It's like the confined kind of sense. It really it adds to the story.
It adds to the claustrophobia 100%, right? Because the heavens are important in this story, right? Yeah. So I mean, I was blown away by the movie. I may have watched it 4 times already.
I was blown away too, and I've seen a bunch of his other films before, but this is definitely hands down my favorite one from Yorgos Lanthimos. Because
it's a genre specific kind of thriller with like some incredible sort of twists in it. So that scene, just her performance and the strength, and just like nerdy things like the camera placement, like finding them in profile. I think profiles are really interesting because there's an opacity to it. Because you're not seeing both eyes. You're not getting completely inside that person. That person just becomes a figure that's presenting ideas and energy, but you're not somehow targeted by that energy. That energy is going somewhere else. And so there's a lot of those kind of low angle profiles that keep us outside of the dynamic of conversation. So you end up, in my opinion, sort of like more engaged in the actual plastics of the text itself, as opposed to the sort of like yearning emotions of like what's going on between those people. And so I just thought that was just like a beautifully like executed dynamic of a great scene, and just like what's the word I'm looking for when something is a masterclass.
Yeah.
A masterclass in sort of like how to sort of like tell a scene between two people with diametrically opposed ideas about how to sort of like conquer the other person, how to get how to overcome them, and neither of them really winning, right?
Right.
But each of them strongly sort of like declaring their point of view, but ultimately ends up sort of getting them, each of them, nowhere in a funny way. Yet they're expressing their entire point of view and who they are, and all of what they feel like the consequences of like what their actions are going to lead to, without actually sort of like arriving at any kind of finality. Because the scene just kind of dies. They just turn around. She's like, "Oh, but I think we can still talk." And I thought I had more power, but I don't. And he's just up the stairs and gone. And then it's out of it. We're on to other things.
And then also the actor that plays his cousin was actually I have to look up his name, but he was actually a guy that really is on the spectrum, and I thought
Aiden Delbis.
Yeah.
And the thing that was interesting for me about Elben, like Don, this character's name, about him being, because here you have these two sort of positions in the very fractured world that we live in now, between this sort of like corporate hyperspeak and conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah, right.
And these are two spectrums that we're seeing all the time now, and they're either in opposition or they're commingling. And Don is the silent witness to all of that.
Yeah.
He in some ways is us.
Yeah.
Right? And he's neurodiverse.
Yeah.
And doesn't have the tools to do anything about it. And like us, watching this world that we're in now, right, with these crazy people on over here, on one hand, just spiraling out of control with their theories, and these other people over here who are just like megalomaniacs about the amount of money that they're gonna acquire and how they're gonna control the world, and we're just over here like, okay.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many things that I love, because like you said, what you're touching upon is two things could both be true. Like,
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
she is a freaking alien. You know what I mean? Like, which I loved. I loved the ending. You know what I mean? Like the payoff was so great. Maybe I should edit the spoiler alert out because it's too new of a movie. But I will say, like, Jesse Plemons' character Teddy, despite him, like, he could be right about certain things, but he could also be a psychopath that's not a good person. Like that's basically, you know what I mean?
Look what happens. Look what we learn about him.
Exactly.
Right? Even though we want to sort of like, at some point, his understand, aside from, assuming that she's an alien, his understanding of the way that the world works is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Right. But then all of that, when we find out who he really is, what's going on in that sort of hidden part of the basement, all of that suddenly gets torn down.
Yeah.
Which is a very weird and very brave kind of moment, because it's like, we've been with this guy for so long and we felt for him, and we want, in a funny way, we want him to sort of achieve at least something, or to survive, or get whatever. But then we find out that he's even darker, right? And even more, even sicker than we thought, because of what he's done in the past. It's a very, very weird twist. And the thing about the ending, so I've talked to a lot of people about this movie who like, but what about the ending, dude?
I love the ending. I loved it.
I think the ending was really interesting, but you can sort of see why, like, there's just choices in like costumes, right, and production design.
Right.
It was out there. It wasn't what you'd expect. It was.
I think that's what I loved about it. I was like, oh man, this went in a direction that I don't know. It was
fun.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. I was really into it.
Even like coming out of the water with the sort of like the dry ice effect. It was a little bit. It felt very like theatrical to me. Yeah. Right. It reminded me a little bit of Beau is Afraid.
I haven't seen Beau is Afraid. I love Joaquin Phoenix. I got to watch it. But
well, Ari Aster, dude, come on.
Yeah, I know.
Right. But so great. The thing about Beau is Afraid, my take on that movie is that it is a movie made like an experimental theater director decided to make this crazy movie, who didn't really know a lot about making movies and the rules of what you're supposed to do to make movies. Yeah. But he's an experimental theater director, so he's got an incredible vision. Yeah. Putting things out there. And, everybody's sort of like, oh, Beau is Afraid, not that great. I actually ended up watching and thought it was fantastic.
Well, it's also interesting you mentioned Ari Aster, because he also did Eddington.
Yes.
And that was also similar in the vein of, if you have a conspiracy sort of minded situation, and seeing how that would actually play out. Like what would it look like if it would actually played out?
Right. And he's talked about basically, his thing is that editing is basically sort of like about what happens, when these AI data centers, basically. He basically said it was a movie about what happens when a data center comes to your town and how it kind of tears you apart. So because that's what he feels like the biggest danger for America is right now. There's a director's cut out of what's his movie that takes place in Switzerland?
Midsummer.
There's a director's cut out now of that.
I got to see that. Yeah, that was an incredible film too. Yeah, definitely strong filmmaker.
It's so late. What time is it?
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, man.
Oh no, it's 10 o'clock. It's like I'm a granddad. So.
Yeah. I didn't mean to keep you.
No, it's okay. But I'm just like, I'm realizing, why am I like losing track of what I'm talking about? Oh yeah, because I'm.
Is there anywhere people could follow along with you or your sort of work? Is there any social media or anything like that you want to plug?
I keep on planning on putting together like I just have a nickgomez.com website, which is really kind of like clips of my work and stuff for like TV people to sort of access. Yeah. That has like it's just a big voluminous level of like 25 different shows and stuff like that. But I don't have anything that's more sort of tailored than that. Yeah. I'm bad about social media.
Well, listen, man, if you don't need it, most people are on it because they need it in some sort of capacity, but you're doing your thing without social media. So Nick, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you so much.
This is a lot of fun. What a great conversation this has been, man. I really liked it a lot. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the Film Situation podcast with your host, Zef Cota.